Call the July 20th regular meeting of the Board of Education for LaGrange, Highlands to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Could you please state the time, Mr. Taylor?
Oh, I'm sorry, it is 7 p.m.
Mr. Taylor?
Here.
Mrs. Gussentine?
Here.
Mrs. Fatella?
Here.
Mrs. Bruno?
Here.
Mrs. Dunleavy?
Here.
Mrs. Golm?
Here.
Mrs. Mitchell?
Here.
All right, please rise and join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, item 3, communications, visitors, comments, and participation. Just a quick note here. Public comments are valuable and important to board members. However, keep in mind that this is a business meeting held in public and not a forum. The board, at its discretion, may choose to address an issue raised during the public comment, but please understand that the lack of action on your comments does not imply lack of interest in what you say. If you provide contact information on the sign-up sheet, Superintendent Munch will follow up with you over the next few days, and we request that you limit your comments to 5 minutes. So I have Don James, if you want to step up to the mic.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
This mic.
This mic.
No, at the podium.
Oh,
You're
it
okay.
is the podium?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Yeah.
How's this? Yeah, good. Hi. It's been about 30 years since I've spoken, since my 20s, advocating recycling. I'm a parent, 2 children in Highlands, very proud of the school district. One's in middle school, one's in elementary school. And there's been lots of discussions on Facebooks and Instagrams and all the social media where it's really easy to like and type and whatever. Maybe only a couple people are here tonight. But as a parent, I should backtrack. My wife and I have had a home care business, elder care business for 13 years. We're in the front lines, behind the front lines through this pandemic. And a lot of challenges, obviously, we face in this line of work. I'm here tonight to advocate. I want masks to be optional for our kids. Masks, cloth masks, are ineffective at best, in my opinion. Here's a simple example. If you want to do this at home, put on your cloth mask, go to a room, spray your favorite cologne or perfume in the air, and then see if you can smell it. I can almost guarantee you're going to smell it. So what does this prove? Well, easily Google facts. The COVID-19 virus is, 125 nanometers. And what you smell in the air is in chemistry called an ester, which is what you smell, and that's usually less than 300 nanometers. So it's 2 to 3 times the size of the COVID virus. So if you smell the perfume or cologne in the air, you're going to get 2 to 3 times more COVID-19 exposure to your lungs than what you would from the perfume that you smell or the cologne. So it's a simple example. You can go home and try yourself. Just try it. It's very simple. And I know this in February, the fear was incredible, especially in the nursing homes, especially seeing what was going on in New York. I mean, everybody's looking at everybody, you're the typhoid Mary, or you're the super asymptomatic super spreader. A lot of fear, but we got a lot more facts a year later, and we don't need the masks. We still need mitigation efforts, social distancing. All important as always, you're sending your kids to school healthy. You're not loading them up with Tylenol so they can pass the screen at the nurse's office so you can have an easy day at work. I think as a whole, the community's done very well with that, and we can continue to do that, and we're very good at it. It's served the school systems for decades, the honor system of the parents, sending their kids healthy to school. And we haven't had a wave of asymptomatic super spreaders, and we can see this from last year, the parochial schools. The kids were primarily not masked, and we had no issues of asymptomatic super spreading kids putting waves of COVID through the school systems there. And we had much higher infection rates back then than we do now, practically under 1% from the last 7 days. And the other issue I just want to bring up is these stats and metrics that we use. I've never seen science or data science so skewed in my life, especially in news. Anybody that's done any statistical schoolwork or analysis of data and how to present it, it's incredible what kind of conclusions are made off of data that really has no support. And so when you look at metrics, you know, we have whatever, 1% infected. You know, what's the, you know, dig in a little more. Is it the 12 to 8-year-olds? Is it the elderly? Is it, you know, people in my age group, which is more vulnerable, 40 to 50? Just look at the data in a little more detail. Dig beyond the headlines. Dig beyond the, you know, the what do you call that, bait and click stuff. So, in summary, let's get the mask off the kids, please. You know, keep the other things. Wash the hands. Clean the schools very well. Social distance. You know, don't send your don't send your kids to school if they have any symptoms. Very simple. So let's keep doing the right things that we've been doing. That's it.
Thank you. And then Anita Dabrowski.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Adita Dabrowski. My family resides in Highlands, and we have 2 students in this school. Public speaking is not my forte, so please bear with me. First, I would like to welcome the new superintendent, as well as many new members of the board. We sincerely believe the entire district is very excited to support you and very hopeful that together we can achieve great things for students and families in this community. I'm not here today to make angry statements or any derogatory comments regarding many unpopular decisions the previous school board made during this pandemic. I'm here to plead with you to please make the masks optional. Every member of this community knows that forcing kids to wear masks has negatively impacted our children emotionally, socially, physically, and all for the purpose no other than providing false comfort to adults who should know better. Adults are supposed to ease children's fear and assure them that there are no monsters under the bed. Instead, we are frightening them into believing they're being stalked by invisible monster lurking in the air they breathe, and even though science and data shows the risk for kids to suffer extreme complications from the virus is very low. Prolonged mask wearing will scar our kids, as the pressure from the elastic mask straps can leave kids with permanently protruding ears. By hiding teachers' lips and muffling their speech, mask wearing prevents children from developing linguistic skills and hearing-impaired kids from reading lips. Kids are unable to rely on important cues from the teachers, and this can lead to a misinterpretation, especially for children on the autism spectrum. The mask gives our kids headaches. They make them unhappy, impaired, drowsy, and fatigued. Masks are breeding grounds for infections from bacteria, mold, and fungi, which can cause irreversible lung damage. Although we cannot undo the past, this new board and this community has a chance and moral and legal responsibility to do the right thing going forward. Many of us are here today trying to be heard and simply saying we do not want our kids masked anymore. We respect the fact that vaccinated individuals might still want to wear a mask or a shield or even both, but the choice should be for every individual to make based on their own health history and personal preference. The basic and the fundamental right of any human being is to be able to make health decisions for themselves and their children. Breathing freely does not seem like something we should ask any other person or institution for permission for. All of you here have the power to show us you care. The students, the parents, and this community is asking you to do the right thing. Many schools in the area already did. It would be amazing to start the new school year showing our kids that they have a voice and their voice matters. Thank you. Please remove the masks or at least make them optional today. Thank you.
Thank you. Abby McEntee, did I say that right?
Thank you. I appreciate you taking me. I'm a little bit late because I was actually teaching myself. I'm here to ask for the opposite, to make the masks mandatory. I'm vaccinated, so I feel free to take off my mask and feel safe. I know that for my children and many others, they understand that wearing the mask doesn't protect themselves, but it's protecting the other unvaccinated children. And so I would hope that the board would make my own children safe by asking that all children do that. Our children did it all through last year. There were no large issues from wearing the masks. And I think what we all agreed from last year on is that in-person learning is probably the most important thing to the whole community. I feel that if we allow masks to be optional, we jeopardize the in-person learning. I don't understand how it's going to work if and when COVID has an outbreak because of the no masking. How are we going to figure out that's an entire class that needs to quarantine or stop in-person learning? So I'm hoping that we can stick it out a little bit longer. Again, vaccines are what are going to help us all take the masks off. And because our children aren't able to yet get the vaccine, especially at the 12 and under stage, I'm hoping that we can still work together as a community to keep them all safe until they can be vaccinated, and then we can start to unmask and help each other again in that way. So I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. That's it from the sign-up sheet. One last chance, if anybody else wants to speak. All right, thank you. All right, next up, learning plan updates.
All right, I'm going to have Amy and Allie join us up here. And we're going to start with a quick update on summer school, which it's been fantastic to see smiling kids outside the building. You can see their smiles through their masks, and they seem to really be enjoying summer school. So.
Yeah, it's been a great start. It was nice to have a little bit of a delay before everyone come back. Teachers are doing a phenomenal job in the classroom. We have ECE for the first time, and it is just an amazing experience to see those kiddos come in each day and participate. So yeah, summer school is off to an amazing start.
Yeah, and summer school is no small undertaking from a coordination standpoint, and so I want to publicly acknowledge Amy and Allie for doing a great job of coordinating that and supervising it. It's a great opportunity for our students, and they're doing a great job. So as we get into the learning plan for the upcoming school year, there were really three driving forces for us and three priorities as we started these discussions. The first and most important one was to prioritize student safety. The second was to build strong connections. We know that last year there were limited opportunities to do that due to coming in different times and for a partial day, and the ability to really connect with each other and with the teachers. While the teachers did a great job of making the best that they could of those situations, it wasn't like a typical school year where we build those really strong connections, which fuels the learning. And that was true in every community and every school that was dealing with partial attendance and all the stresses of last year. And so being mindful to create opportunities to build those strong connections is really important for us moving forward. And then, of course, to facilitate that meaningful learning, the reason we have kids come to school is to help them grow and to learn and to build bright futures. And so those were our three guiding principles. As I'm new to the Highlands community, and so as I started my journey, I've been listening to what people say about the community and about the schools, and it led me to some beliefs about this community that I asked my administrative team, like, are these things true? Like, this is what I'm sensing, and it was a resounding yes. And so because these beliefs guided the rest of our conversation, I thought it'd be important just to highlight some of these. The first is that the Highlands staff, administrators, school board, and parents are highly committed to the success of our students. That's true in varying degrees everywhere, but I've really been struck during my time in Highlands by the commitment to a really, really high-quality education that every group of people I've come in contact with have demonstrated, from my meetings with the staff members to my work with the administrative team. The school board was my first contact in Highlands, and it was clear throughout the process that they were really committed. And I've heard the exact same thing about our parent community. The second is that our students will benefit from those four groups working together, working collaboratively, and supporting each other's unique role in the district. Each one of those four groups brings a unique perspective to what we should be doing with our students. They bring a unique role and set of expertise, and our students will benefit, our schools will benefit when those four groups are working side by side and supporting each other. And so that is one of the things that we'll be striving towards. Every day of learning matters. We learned last year, well, we already knew it, but it was really reinforced last year, that instruction is most effective when students and teachers are together and in person and in the classroom. And so that's one of our beliefs as we head into this plan. And then that it's vital that we educate the whole child. We're missing something if we're just focusing on physical safety or just the academic growth or just the social and emotional. When we're able to do all those things well and at once, that's really when our students benefit. And from what I've learned, this is something that Highlands has done a really great job of in the past. So as probably everyone knows by now, the CDC came out with updated guidance for K-12 schools. IDPH quickly on that same day accepted the guidance from the CDC and endorsed it. And while that guidance provides recommendations for schools and communities, it does give local schools the ability to make decisions that are best for them based on their local metrics. And this is really a product of the CDC being a national organization. And when they're writing guidance, they have every school district in the country in mind. If you look at a map right now of COVID positivity rates, and you can see different points in the country where there are different levels. There are different levels of vaccination in the country. And so in establishing a one-size-fits-all guidance, it's understandable that they would put out something that would work for every single community, but also open the door for communities to be thoughtful about their own conditions and metrics and tweak those recommendations based on their local health metrics. And so that's the process that all school districts are in right now, and people are coming to different conclusions in those conversations. Speaking of our local metrics and what the CDC referenced when we would make that local decision, this is just a quick snapshot of our current reality in the Highlands area. So in the top left corner there, the colored chart there, that's those four categories are the CDC's criteria for determining low transmission, moderate transmission, substantial, and high transmission. And they base it on two criteria: total new cases, which is a 7-day rolling average, and then the positivity rate, which is also a 7-day rolling average. And you can see there that we're able to drill down on the two zip codes, 60525 and 60558. And as of July 16th, our total new cases per 100,000 were 18.7, which is in the moderate range of 10 to 49. And then our positivity rate is at 1.5%, which is below the threshold for low transmission of 5%. And so those are our current numbers. The two graphs on the bottom provide more of a long-term snapshot of our local school district, of that same community's positivity rate and new case rate. Those colored bars, the blue, the yellow, and the orange, correspond to the CDC transmission levels, and those bars represent the ceiling. So on the left, you can see the blue bar at 5%. That's the ceiling of the low transmission. Once you get above that, you would be into the moderate transmission. The other statistic that's up there is the percentage of Cook County population that's fully vaccinated. Right now, we're at 54%, and I learned that we have a source of data for vaccination rates for our more local community. So we'll be able to drill down to that even more, because that is one of the considerations in making a decision is what's the percentage of vaccination for the people living in that area. So I'll pause there for a minute if there's any questions or comments, or we're good? Okay. So as we're making this decision and as we're developing a recommendation, there are some important considerations that our team is wrestling with, and things that we wanted to just make known that these are the kinds of things we're thinking through. Requiring unvaccinated students and staff to wear a mask would be the stance most consistent with the CDC guidance. We know that, and that's a conversation we're having, given the CDC and IDPH's role in providing us with good information on how to keep the public in our schools healthy. We are also considering and talking about the impacts of masking. Masking reduces the risk of transmitting COVID from one person to another, per the CDC and IDPH's documents. It also reduces the risk of close contact quarantine. So in the new guidance from the CDC, it defines when you have to go into a quarantine, and if both individuals are masked, if you're 3 feet or more of social distancing, you do not have to quarantine. If you're unmasked, then that threshold goes up to 6 feet. So if there were positive cases, and if we were in a mask-free environment for unvaccinated students, it's logical that we would have more students who are who are quarantined.
John, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Are we able to maintain 3 feet of distance among kids in the classroom?
We are.
6 feet?
We are not. Yep.
In the elementary and middle?
Mm-hmm. Yes. I should say that when we're seated, when the students are seated, that's what we're talking about. There are going to be times when a kid gets up to sharpen a pencil, or we're walking down the hall, or we're coming into the building, et cetera. But with Ms. Magruder and Kent today, we walked all the classrooms of the elementary school and looked at the seating arrangements. We talked about the number of students that would be in each class. And when students are seated and at their desks, we are able to maintain at least 3 feet. And depending on the size of the classroom and the number of students in that class and in that grade level, in some, it's more than that. And especially in the middle schools where we're essentially dividing that cohort of students by 6 a lot of times, where they go to 6 places instead of 5. There's even fewer kids in there, but yes, that minimum threshold of 3 feet can be maintained.
And I know, just to add, John, last year we were able to maintain 6 feet of social distancing in the middle school, so it's a little bit different to hear the 3 feet. But in consideration of the kids who were remote coming back and us having more numbers in the middle school, we can't guarantee that in the classrooms anymore.
And then a couple other impacts of masking. It is it is a different experience. We've all experienced the difference between having a conversation with someone that is masked and unmasked. There's facial expressions that are lost behind a mask. There's emotional cues, and there's just that interpersonal piece that is more challenging when students are in a classroom with a teacher, and there's that. It's more difficult to make connections. Like, teachers are constantly smiling and providing positive reinforcement through facial cues and through nods, and so that's just a part of the communication that teachers do that's made more difficult for them behind a mask. And then, teachers are talking all day, and kids are listening and talking to each other and talking back to the teacher, and when through a mask, that's more difficult. Last year was really difficult for teachers because they were having to project even more through a mask. With the vaccination rate of our staff, that'll be less of an issue. But masks on kids when they're talking to the teacher, asking a question, talking to each other, it does have an impact on the conversation. Another consideration is the quarantine guidelines. We talked about this a little bit, but I'll cover it quickly. Vaccinated staff and students are never required to quarantine if they're in close contact with a positive case unless they become symptomatic. So even if you are vaccinated, if you're in close contact and you become symptomatic, you do have to quarantine. Unvaccinated individuals who are wearing masks can be in close contact up of 3 feet or more without having to quarantine. Without a mask, that threshold is 6 feet. And the same criteria of 15 minutes of contact over the course of a 24-hour period remained constant from last year.
Can I ask, when you have to quarantine, how long is it?
So that's not something that they've adjusted at this point. It's currently 14 days. It was reduced to 7 days for adults if they were testing, and just recently we got a notice from ISB that Shield testing is being made available. Shield and Binex Now are two tests that are being made available at no cost to school districts, and so we're engaging in conversations about the ability to use that testing in order to address the need to quarantine. One of the other things that was our reality last year, we quarantined, and when I say we, my previous experience, we quarantined hundreds and hundreds of students per the guidelines, and we had a very, very low rate of those quarantined students actually becoming symptomatic. And I think that was true everywhere. And so reducing that quarantine period, if we're able to do that responsibly and in accordance with guidance, like, that's a conversation we're engaging in. So as it currently stands, it's the same as last year.
Okay.
But I think given the availability of rapid testing, which was all part of the evolution last year. Like, it was mid-year that some of that stuff really became available. And so we're still exploring those options, whether there is an ability to use that rapid test where we get results in 15 minutes to inform our decision on a required quarantine. But that's not a decision that I can make unilaterally. But that is something we're looking into.
Jenny, Jim?
I don't know if this is on, I'll just shout. If we decide to go masking optional, if somebody opted in to wear a mask, would they be able to do the 15 minutes and 3 feet? Or is that too complicated to keep track of between Jane wears a mask, Bob doesn't?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, contact tracing is something we do at the individual student level. We get down into the minutia of assigning seats, from homeroom to to art class, to lunch, so that we know the same students are sitting next to each other in different settings, so that if one of those students tests positive, there's a smaller, what I call blast radius of kids that need to quarantine. And so we do drill down to the student level. And so if we were in a situation where masks were not mandatory, but a student was opting to wear one, if the other person was also wearing a mask, then the 3 feet would kick into play. But per the current guidance, both individuals have to be masked. So that is a nuance there.
Is the hope that we sort of return to the typical function in the classroom that's not just kids sitting at their desks all day? Like, are we hoping to get back to like sitting on the carpet and sitting at the guided reading table? So that would
Yes.
put kids closer than 3 feet multiple times during the school day, yes?
So that's a conversation that we're still having. There are costs and benefits to every single one of these decisions that we're having to make and recommendations, and it really is a cost-benefit analysis in every one of these, because there's something really, really valuable about a teacher being able to bring students back to the guided reading table and delivering targeted small group instruction. There's value in that whole group instruction can never bring. And that requires a certain level of proximity to the teacher and to each other. In the younger grades, in kindergarten and in first grade especially, there's incredible value to bringing the students together on the carpet and sharing a story and doing conversation and getting to know you activities and community building in the kindergarten classroom. There's great value in that that's lost when we're all scattered across the classroom, seated in desks. Students' attention is different when they're in the back corner of the room. The ability for the teacher to connect with them, the ability for the kids to turn and talk to each other is different. And so we greatly desire to bring that value back to the classroom, and that's our goal and our intention. We're just having to weigh that against the fact that in doing so, we may be increasing the potential for more quarantines. It doesn't guarantee it. We have to have a positive case before we get into the kind of the danger zone of quarantining kids. And so it becomes a question and an analysis of, is the value that's gained from being able to gather at the guided reading table and gather on the carpet on a daily basis, is the value of that, does that outweigh the potential for a student to possibly get quarantined, during the year and miss a week of school? That's something that we're weighing out and wrestling with, and that'll be part of our final recommendation. But there's not an easy answer to it, but I do know that a lot was lost last year by not being able to do those things. And the teachers felt it, the kids felt it. And so, yeah, we're actively working to get back to that. It's just it's a calculated risk, because we could say with confidence we will have very few quarantines next year if we said every kid wears a mask and every kid sits in their desk the entire day, 3 feet apart. We could all but eliminate close contacts and quarantines if we did that. That just comes at the cost of sitting in your desk and wearing a mask all day and not doing that interaction with your teacher, and that's where that analysis comes. Yeah, Jenny?
So I'm just trying to walk through these scenarios in my head.
Mhm.
Okay, so if the kids are at their desk, they're 3 feet apart, they have their mask on, they want to go, I just want to make sure I understand. The teacher wants to have everyone sit together on the carpet. They could do that for up to 14 minutes, correct?
14 minutes and 59
technically.
seconds.
Technically, it's a cumulative 15 minutes,
Okay.
and so you would
So
be
you
would be
really-
correct if when you hit 14 minutes, you said, okay, Christine, Jennifer, you cannot come close to each other the rest of the day, which between recess and lunch and hallways and bathroom breaks is probably unreasonable. So, the spirit of that is a little different than we come together and then we break at 14 minutes, because it's likely that we'd be close for a minute in the day. But what you're talking about is, that is something that we think about, is how long do we bring kids together and who do we bring together? It may be that, one of our strategies is bringing kids together in smaller groups on the carpet so we can be spaced apart more. These are the conversations that, I have, I'm going to engage in a conversation with the team leaders following this meeting about some of these strategies and get the teacher input and collaborate with them on what makes sense and what would be effective. Those would be the kinds of things of how do we get kids together still without putting everything at risk. But again, this is where our local metrics weigh into the conversation. If we have low positivity rate and low total new cases, then maybe coming together is a risk that's worth taking because of the benefit of it. And this is, I'm probably going to say this multiple times tonight, and it's actually in the presentation later, but I'll mention it now. This is a very fluid situation. Really what we're talking about is how should we start the year? No matter how we start the year, we're going to be ready to pivot at any point in time based on the metrics. And so let's say hypothetically we start with bringing kids to the guided reading table and bringing kids to the carpet because the metrics are low and because there's a lot of value that. If at a moment in the school year we got a bump in cases and things were starting to spread, we can always at any time say, okay, we're strictly adhering to the 3 feet and we're wearing masks and et cetera. The things that we're talking about, the menu of layered mitigations and prevention strategies that we're talking about are all very fluid. We can be very agile in our application of these and our removal of these as deemed responsible to do by the metrics. It's a different conversation than last year when we were talking about the actual learning model. It's very difficult to be fluid and agile between learning models. You're talking about parents' work schedule. You're talking about class schedules and special schedules, and that's not something you can do. When we're coming back 5 days a week, in person, full day, and all we're changing is wear your mask in these settings, or we're coming to the guided reading table or not, it really is a much more, it's a much more flexible schedule or scenario where we can employ these and relax on them as needed. And so I want to be clear that no matter what we start with, the recommendation will not be that we come to the guided reading table all year long no matter what, or that masks are required or recommended all year long. Everything will be, this is our recommended starting point. And we'll have a really good idea of what would take us away from that or allow us to change that. But everything, we're just constructing now, what's the starting point that makes the most sense? And then what would inform any movement in the future?
I think that's really smart, John, and I think feedback that I heard last year was it seems stuck, and are we ever going to have an opportunity to reevaluate this? So I would be in favor of one, defining the metrics similar to, I think, 2 or 3 slides ago. The mitigations that we have, that we're able to use, and a schedule where we will go through and look at this. Weekly, we're reviewing it. As a board, every time we meet, we're looking at it.
Right.
Are there mitigations we can peel back? Are there mitigations that we need to put forward? So I think for me, making sure that we're very transparent in the way those decisions are being made,
Yep.
And that they're not arbitrary and
Right.
they're not forever, I think
Yeah.
are all really positive things.
Yeah, great.
Are the kids wearing masks at recess in summer school? I should know since I have 2 children in summer school and I have no idea.
When the students go outside, they're able to take off their masks, yeah.
And the current CDC guidance does say for next year that masks are not required when outside.
So as a follow-up, are we thinking that outdoor educational settings will still be a thing for next year, and we'll have tents or whatever, maybe not, but
So we haven't had a conversation about tents yet, about creating outdoor spaces to use. But one of the strategies will definitely be to maximize our use of those outdoor settings whenever we can. PE is an easy example of that lends itself to being able to do that. There are some things that it just doesn't make sense to go outside and try to pull off, on a breezy September day and you've got papers, but whenever we can, why wouldn't we? For not only for, fresh air, and it's good for kids to get up and get moving, but also as a mitigation strategy. And so, yes, that'll absolutely be one of the tools in our toolbox, for sure. One of the other, oh yeah, go ahead.
Have you had conversations with teachers union, teachers about, I don't know if I think it would be harder to sort of keep track of vaccinated versus unvaccinated, or to teach Zoom in a real classroom. I'd let teachers weigh in on that one. But to me, that would be obviously an issue or something that we would have to have teacher buy-in if we were to allow unvaccinated people to not wear masks.
Yeah, so I met with union leadership and the team leaders from every grade level several weeks ago, and we covered a lot of, everything that's in the learning plan presentation tonight, with the exception of masking and the mitigation strategies.
Sure.
But when it comes to what the school day would look like and how we would handle remote learning, et cetera, and we had a lot of good conversation, we got a lot of good feedback, and so that's the same process that I would go through when we're ready to recommend something as far as a masking or a menu of mitigation strategies. That's absolutely something that we would collaborate with the teachers on, the team leaders, the union leadership. Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Christy reminded me of something that I'm going to ask about now. If somebody is remote because they're quarantined, we have a different system set up now, right? Is that?
Yeah, and we'll get to that
You'll get to
in
that, okay.
Yep, in just a bit. Just because it'll fit within the conversation that's coming up. Yep. One of the other things we're considering is the enforcement of it. If masking is mandatory for unvaccinated individuals, this will especially be a thing at the middle school level. Not that it can't be done, but teachers would need to know the vaccination status of every kid in order to enforce the mask wearing of unvaccinated students, and then monitoring that, walking by the kid's desk when they're not compliant with it, et cetera. Again, if that's where we land and if that's what we need to do, that's absolutely what we'll do. But it is something that would require time and energy in a 40-minute period that, not saying that is a deal breaker one way or the other. It's just something for us to know. Monitoring the enforcement of that will take time and energy.
So last year, we had slightly different rules for the middle school and the elementary school because of the differences in the space. I know typically we try to align, the rules throughout the district, but I'm wondering if this is a situation because many of our middle schoolers are 12 and older and are eligible for the vaccine, if this is a situation where we're considering potentially different rules for the elementary versus middle, because just of the practicality of trying to enforce like you described.
Yeah.
Or if because it's all the same building with the HVAC, and I don't know what the considerations are, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's absolutely something we can consider. Currently, it would be only our 7th and 8th graders, I think, that would be eligible for the vaccine, and, over the course of the year, more of our 6th graders will become eligible, and, you hear different things, and about the availability of it for the younger students. Sometimes you hear it's on the horizon, and then other times you hear it's being delayed. And so, but yeah, we are wrestling with really every kind of scenario, and so yeah, a consideration that's different for grade levels that are they have had the opportunity to be vaccinated and would have fewer unvaccinated students is absolutely one of those combinations we could put together. So there are some things that we know we're going to do next year. That's physical distancing. It's an important strategy, and really our strategy there is to maximize it in all settings. And as we discussed earlier, when seated at their desks and at lunch, we'll be able to maintain at least 3 feet of distancing. Regular hand washing and the use of hand sanitizer, at strategic times when the kids are about to put something in their mouth, or when they come back from a setting where they've been touching, doorknobs and gym equipment. Those will be just common sense things that we were doing last year that we'll continue to do. Cleaning and sanitization routines will all follow the CDC guidelines. I know Kent and his crew are on top of that, and things have shifted a little bit with the CDC away from sanitize everything that doesn't move to soap and water is sufficient and actually recommended in many settings. And that changes a little bit when you have a positive confirmed case versus just general cleaning. But you can be sure that Kent is on top of all those recommendations, and they'll be following those closely. Contact tracing and quarantining will continue. Ventilation is one of the strategies that the CDC recommends, and that looks like having the windows open whenever we can to just introduce that fresh air. Our current system changes the air 6 to 8 times every hour, and it's set to introduce as much fresh air as possible into the system. And different systems are built to be able to handle different levels of, they're called MERV ratings, and so we've maximized what our system can handle. And so everything that we can do in those areas, we will be doing. The last one is the seating charts. I mentioned this before, but just being intentional about minimizing the number of close contacts. In a typical year, kids just get mixed up every class period in middle school and for specials, et cetera. And we're hopeful for a day where scheduling is easier and we can do that again, and kids get to sit next to different kids every period. But our reality right now is if there's something that we can do to minimize close contacts, the responsible thing is for us to do that. And so one of the ways we'll do that is through those strategic seating charts. Additional strategies that are possibilities but that are not part of our plan at this point is surveillance testing. We all know what that is and kind of the costs and benefits of it. And then grouping students into cohorts is another thing that this is really more of a middle school thing. It does really create some limitations in scheduling and into course offerings. And so this is something that we're not starting with because it's something that we had to do last year, and we kind of experienced the downsides to it. I think it was something that it was a necessary move last year. I think given the drop in our numbers, it's not something that we need to put on the list right now, but it is out there if things were to change dramatically.
John?
Yeah.
Can you, I know you're still learning about the shield testing, but how does that compare to what we did last year?
So it's a saliva-based test, and you get results within 24 hours is what they're saying. It's the one that the University of Illinois developed, and through a partnership with the state is being provided. So I don't remember the date, but I did put my list or my name on the list of I'd like to learn more, and so there's an upcoming informational session that I'll be able to probably answer more questions, but I know it's saliva-based. I know it's endorsed by IDPH and ISB, and I know we get the results in about a day.
Is this testing for kids that may have been exposed, or is it like the surveillance last year where you sent the saliva sample every Thursday?
It can be used in either capacity.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I believe I'd have to, when we were researching the companies, this company versus the Safeguard last year, again, John, at your informational, I'm sure they'll share, but I believe the Shield is a PCR test where the Safeguard is an antigen test. So we still haven't gotten guidance if we're allowed to use an antigen test to, kind of reduce the quarantine or say kids don't have to quarantine. So, but with the PCR, and then that way too, if someone did come up with an antigen test of positive, at this point, families might still have to go to their physician and get a PCR to confirm it.
Okay.
Correct. So masking protocols being considered, and this is where the bulk of our conversation as an administrative team is going to be in the coming week, really pulling into consideration what are our local metrics, what are the recommendations of the CDC and IDPH and the American Academy of Pediatrics. How does that all play with our experience from last year and what we're hearing from our community? And there's a lot of variables in this, but these are the kinds of things that we're considering. One option would be mandatory masking for all unvaccinated staff and students. That would be a strict adherence to the CDC's blanket recommendation. Another option is recommended masking for all unvaccinated staff and students, and this is, this is the path that several local districts have taken. They've been bubbling up in the news and in different media outlets that this is the decision that some schools are making, and I know that sometimes we use the word optional masking, and it's a little bit of just semantics, but I do want to be clear that while the decision hasn't been made by any stretch of the imagination on what we're going to recommend, if we did end up in a situation where we were not mandatory masks, it would be recommended masking would be our recommendation. Optional masks, it communicates something different, and it would be that masks are recommended. And that's language that other districts are using because it's consistent with the CDC, and it's still giving credence to the fact that that for some people and for some communities and for some places where metrics are, case counts are higher, it is recommended that we do this. And so it's not, so there's a nuance between optional and recommended, but I just want to be clear that the reason you don't see optional up there and why some people would say, hey, where's the option where my kid, gets to choose, that would be recommended. We would still be recommending that people wear it. So the word optional wouldn't be part of any of these scenarios. Another option is recommended masking if paired with weekly surveillance testing. So a mandatory participation in surveillance testing in order to have masks be recommended. There's also a hybrid approach that we could take where students, when seated 3 or more feet apart, like at their desks, and we would call that a safe distance, that they're able to take their masks off and work at their desk or have a class conversation. But then if they were to move into a setting where it was less than 3 feet on the carpet, at the guided reading table, walking in the hallways, that they would throw their mask on and get from A to B, or that they would have their mask on during, a 15-minute conversation at the carpet where they're in closer proximity. So being able to hear each other isn't as big of an issue. I'll mention this option, masking during that time when we're less than 3 feet, it wouldn't be done to change the number of kids that would have to quarantine. Masking during those times really wouldn't have any impact on our contact tracing. It would just be an acknowledgement that, the mask serves some purpose of catching, moisture droplets. And if we're in close proximity for 15 minutes, and if one of those students does end up testing positive, we might avert other students becoming positive by students putting on a mask when they come to that setting. So that hybrid approach of being surgical about the distance between students and the recommendation versus requirement of masking based on that distancing is another approach. The other one is a tiered approach where we start the year in one setting, and then we have a transition from mandatory to recommended after a short period of assessing local metrics and how the school year is going, and observing local, communities that have maybe taken a different approach and what their experience has been, and how long we would need to go in that first tier of mandatory masking before we felt confident that metrics are staying stable and local communities who are mask recommended versus mandatory are not having significant issues or significant numbers of quarantines. It's a dangerous game to predict that, and so really we would just follow the data on that. So there's a lot to consider there, and I'm not. This isn't the point where we all vote or anything like that. This is just a kind of an acknowledgement of there are a lot of ways that this can be approached, and we're trying to consider every possibility for the purpose of creating the best possible scenario for our students and our teachers, and create a learning environment that's not only safe but meaningful and engaging, and wrestling with what those options are. So yeah, I'll pause there for questions or thoughts.
Are we going to have any sort of self-certification process?
We will. Yeah, it's not mandatory in the CDC guidance, and IDPH is not telling us that we were. It will be my recommendation, though, that in the beginning of the year, parents do a one-time acknowledgement of what it means to make responsible choices about sending your kids to school. So, it just getting it in front of parents again to say, here are expectations. Like, here are the things we can do for each other as a community, and making sure those are clear, and having parents acknowledge, I see these, I understand, like, these things haven't changed from last year, or if there are nuances, I understand what those changes are. So it won't be a daily check-in like it was last year. The current numbers in the community just don't warrant that, and it's not a mandate. But I do think there's value in everyone in the system acknowledging, I know what the expectations are, and I'm telling you, I'm willing to do my part.
I'm worried about the practicality. It's just a thought. The practicality of trying to make a mask wearing mandatory. I don't see anywhere up here where masks would just be required for everyone. Just like you have to wear appropriate clothing. If you're wearing your pajamas to school, you get sent home, whatever. If you're not wearing your mask, we're giving you a mask and you got to keep it on. It seems like that could be a very easy approach, but at the same time, we know how it impacts learning and teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not being considered, correct? Or I just
it hasn't been part of our conversation to this point to require vaccinated individuals to wear a mask for the sake of consistency and ease. It's not that it couldn't be, it just hasn't been one of the things that we haven't felt the need to go there in order to pull off a solid recommendation that we can implement. And one of the things that we wrestle with, and one of the things that in my mind, I'll just speak for myself, has not brought that to kind of the forefront of my thinking, is the metrics that we're seeing right now. The 1.5% positivity rate, the 11 maybe new case count per 100,000. If we're
Which is weird 'cause we
required,
don't even have 100,000 people in our.
yeah, so it's all scaled, but
It's actually like 5.
it's actually, yeah, it's lower than that even of how many actual new cases there are. But if our positivity rate and our case count is that low, and we were still to require vaccinated individuals to wear a mask, at what point would we not require that? Right? I mean, it seems like there would come a moment in time where positivity rate and news case counts were so low that it would make sense that especially vaccinated people would not have to wear that, let alone a conversation about unvaccinated people. And it seems like we're already starting there. So in my mind, I don't even know how the metrics would change that would cause us to then peel back that mitigation. If we're saying vaccinated or unvaccinated masks are required at 1.5% positivity rate, where do we go from there?
Right. That makes sense.
But you're absolutely right. Like, it is an option. It is something that we have thought through. It was one of the things that we got to set aside and say, okay, we're left with a bunch of options, just not all of them. So
Because I think you do have to weigh, the amount of effort we want to put forward in
Sure.
trying to implement whatever is decided, and what that takes away from the time that the kids are at school, and they're here to learn. And if we're spending a lot of time trying to make sure that people who have to have masks on have masks on and keeping track, I'm just trying to weigh like the cost benefit of that.
yeah,
So.
and that's something that I think the teachers, having lived this for a year, will be able to provide us with some good feedback. And kids, and one of the things we learned last year is our kids and our teachers are incredibly resilient and incredibly creative and persistent. And so they're going to figure out a way to do whatever we ask them to do. It's just balancing that between the cost of it, right? And so we could manage any of these. It's just at what cost?
And maybe that's why other school districts, have said it's just a recommendation and it's up to the families and the parents, because it is a lot for the school district to take on.
Absolutely.
When our role is, something different, so.
Well,
Yeah.
But you did mention before, like, the difference between the middle and the elementary school, right? And so, like, the concern about being able to tell who is and who isn't vaccinated is really only in the middle school, at least for the time being. And that makes it a lot easier to, to say, everybody's got to wear their mask because everyone's unvaccinated. It just makes it, I think that's something we should keep in mind, is that there is, like you said, there is that difference between the elementary and the middle school, and that takes away the concern of how do we balance who has it and who doesn't.
Right.
Yeah. And at the middle school, it's easier because you do have some kids that are vaccinated, so there'd be fewer kids to kind of track. But it's also, middle school creates a unique challenge because every 40 minutes, you've got a new crop of kids
Yeah.
that you're trying to monitor. So,
And I think I'm just hypothesizing here, but the social emotional impacts of having some kids wearing and some kids not. I mean, it's a visual indicator of, I've been vaccinated, or no, I haven't been vaccinated, and
yeah.
I'm
And
just reflecting on what that means.
Yeah.
Or alternately, if they're not vaccinated and they could, I think there's like 50 layers to that.
It could
Yeah.
create a lot of
In-
unnecessary drama.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll speak to the social and emotional component in more depth here in a little bit, but because you brought it up, I'll mention it briefly. I think no matter what the recommendation is, no matter what our plan is or how our plan evolves over the course of the year, something that's going to be really important is that we engage our students in conversation about the importance of respecting every single individual's decision on this, and how there's just no room for shaming or bullying or making comments, and we don't know what was behind that person's decision to get vaccinated or not. We don't know what was behind that person's decision to wear a mask even though they might not have to, et cetera. And so I think building that empathy, building that awareness in our students is going to be really important no matter what we go with, because in a mask recommended scenario for unvaccinated students, you'll have some that are masked and some that aren't, and that'll be an indicator of who chose to get vaccinated and who didn't. In a mask recommended scenario, you'll have some students who are masked and some who aren't, and that'll be an indicator of who's choosing to keep that added layer of protection and who's not. And so there's really not a scenario except for banning masks or requiring them for everyone where we avoid that situation. And so that's why that variable isn't guiding our recommendation. It's more something that we have in mind that's going to be important no matter what our recommendation is, because that social and emotional well-being of our kids, and it's a great opportunity for us. It's a great opportunity that we know as adults we're constantly coming in contact with people that think differently or act differently or believe differently than we do, and sometimes kids aren't faced with that as much when they're younger. This is going to be a great opportunity where one of your peers is going to be thinking, acting, behaving, believing differently than you, and here's why that's okay, and here's a respectful and responsible way to respond to that.
So, John, I asked a few people where they were with mitigation strategies because I was genuinely curious, because I think you're very strongly on each end of it, but you don't hear much from kind of that middle ground.
Right.
And so the one thing that I heard over and over was, I want the kids in school. I want this year to look as normal as possible. So I would say whatever mitigation strategies we employ that keeps our kids in this school building, learning daily. It also ties back to our strategic plan. The number one goal is student growth and achievement. If they're not here, we can't do it. So I would always factor that into whatever mitigation you choose.
Absolutely.
I agree. I think getting the kids back in the school was the greatest accomplishment.
Yeah.
And, we've just got to be thankful for that they're coming back. And I totally agree, whatever we can do to keep them here.
Yep.
While watching the metrics and being really responsible and using the data in a smart way, right? Like,
Yep.
if you're vaccinated, I see no reason that you shouldn't, unless you're in an airport or hospital or whatever, the public transportation.
Right. Yeah, we're not considering any options where we don't have every kid here every day. And I don't see a situation right now where with any of our options we put that at risk. If numbers in the community change, then some of these protocols being considered would no longer be options, right? We have 5 potential options up here because our community metrics are what they are. As those community metrics change, these options some of these would fall by the wayside, or else we would put at risk the ability to bring everyone into the building. And so that really is a driving factor for us, having every kid with the possibility of coming here. The asterisk on that is a positive case, is going to pop up. A quarantine is going to pop up. We're not talking about a kid can never not have to be here, but we're talking about the masses, and we're talking about, as a classroom, as a school district, being able to maintain our full in-person 5-day a week goal, and that's not something that we will change our protocols, we will change our mitigations before we change our belief that all kids need to be here. Anything else on this before we move on? So, so what from here? We're going to monitor this in the weeks ahead. The metrics are changing on a daily basis, and so we get that new data, and we'll continue. Local health authorities and legal guidance continues to to come in. We'll continue to collaborate with local districts and with our teacher leaders, and make really informed decisions that are that incorporate, what we're hearing in the community. And I mentioned this before, but I'll say it again. What we're generating here is a recommendation for how we start the school year. And whether that recommendation holds for the entire year or until November or until the first week in October will all be driven by our goals to keep as many kids in school as possible and to keep our students as healthy and engaged and as possible, and to keep that learning environment as engaging and beneficial as possible. So we will be coming out with a recommendation when we feel like we've been able to consider everything and think through everything as thoroughly as we need to be able to defend it and make sure that there's solid rationale behind it. And when we come out with that recommendation, we'll address a lot of the specifics that are up there: face coverings, hand washing specifics, self-certification requirements. There's still a lot of details that we need to provide, but they really all hinge on which one of these protocols are we going with. And so this will all be a package recommendation that we communicate to the board and to the community.
When's the first day of school?
23rd, 24th?
23rd is Institute Day, 24th is students.
Yeah, and like I said before, because we can be agile with changing those things, that gives us a lot of flexibility with the timing of this. Like if things feel like they're kind of in flux and things are changing on a daily basis, I'm okay waiting to make that recommendation so that we make the right one. These are not things like the learning model where we need to let teachers know whether they're having all their kids or half the kids. We need to let parents know whether they need to find childcare on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I mean, this is something that isn't as timely as last summer. We still want to get it to everyone as soon as we can, but we don't want to sacrifice making a good decision in order to make a quick decision. So we're going to shift gears a little bit from masking and mitigations to what the school year is going to look like from a learning standpoint. And that's where Allie and Amy are going to support me in this. I'll just hit this opening slide. And this is an important one because it really is a paradigm shift from last year. 2 Marches ago, we entered into a reality that no one ever saw coming, right? Everyone go home and don't come back. And we thought, oh, surely this will pass by August. And we know what last year looked like. And so remote learning and kind of opting to stay home and learn in a different environment became a thing in a way that it never was before. And it was necessary, in a lot of ways at that moment in time. But we learned that it was a good stopgap, but from a sustainability standpoint as a school district, and from what's good for kids and all the benefits that come from being together in a school community, we saw why it needed to be a temporary strategy and not a new normal for us. And so the state superintendent, Carmen Ayala, came out with a declaration that all students should return to in-person learning, and got as specific as to say the only time that we provide remote learning is when an unvaccinated student is required to quarantine per the definition of the IDPH of when you need to do that. So it's not a self-induced quarantine. It's not because it's more convenient or it's just our preference. We're really back to the way you're educated is to come to school and participate in this really great school community that we're created. There's one little carve out. When we're telling you you can't come to school because you're not vaccinated and you were close contact, but that is the only condition under which remote learning can be provided, and it's no longer something you opt into. So I just wanted to take a minute and be clear about that, because it is a shift in philosophy and a shift in kind of the programming that was available last year versus what will be available this upcoming year.
So in addition to continuing our 5 days of in-person learning, we want to bring back those best practice instructional strategies that we've used, but were put on hold this year because of the circumstances. So that includes students moving between classes rather than teachers moving and carting everything from one classroom to the other. The materials will be within that content area classroom. We want to bring back as many clubs and sports. We started that in the spring, but to kind of expand that so that students have the opportunities to participate in activities that are of interest to them. Flexible grouping, and of course then bringing back all of our course levels that we had typically offered, but again last year due to some of the mitigations we were unable to offer. So to kind of bring all of that back and kind of restore some normalcy to our school day.
We also want to continue our journey with our social emotional learning. Again, getting those supports universally to kids, all students, while at the same time really tiering and targeting the supports for students showing greater need too. So to accomplish this, we're going to continue with our second step, which is our universal social emotional learning curriculum, K through 8. Also some specific supplemental resources that different buildings are using, so responsive classroom practices in the elementary school, which is really just a way of building connection with kids and responding in interactions, and Project Wisdom in the middle school, which is a character education program too. Our screener, we'd like to use that again too, so we brought this on board last year. A universal screener really gives us a good idea of what's happening in the district, as well as identifying kids who might need some more support. And then really excited to see that we were able this year to increase social work staffing to support our kids as well.
So knowing where our students are and where they need to go are two key pieces of data for us this year. At the district level, as you know, we analyzed MAP and Ames Web. The building level and grade level teams will then be analyzing it based on their new class composition. Our pre-assessments will be used, and then the PLC teams will analyze that pre-assessment data to really design the instruction. If we need to go back and look at a standard from a previous grade level, we will, teach that and then move on to the current grade level standards. We will provide additional support for reading and math interventions, both within the classroom during win time at the elementary level or as pull-out at the elementary level. Starting in August, we will bring back our math and reading workshop for our middle school students who we have identified as needing some additional support to kind of close that learning gap.
And just as we talked about with in-person learning, a lesson from the pandemic, I think the teachers and the students did an absolutely fabulous job engaging in the remote intervention and instruction as we had to last year, but fully acknowledging that that's not the model we want to live with, and wanting to make sure that our interventions and knowing that they're most effective when supports are delivered in person. So in the world of student supports and related services, bringing back all those different delivery models that kids may have on their plans. Perhaps it's a little bit of pull out with different cohorts of kids. Our push-in model, that was something that really we had to pull back on last year just to make sure we weren't exposing adults and kids to various groups too. So all those models will be back for us, which is really exciting. Our early childhood classrooms will return to full capacity. We were working on reduced capacity last year, just knowing that the nature of those classrooms, it's very hard to stay 6 feet or 3 feet apart. Our little ones don't tend to do that, and the curriculum is very play-based. So going back to the full capacity. And right now, the recommendations for, parent participation is so important when we're talking about our IEPs and our 504 plans, giving parents an option to either come in person and have those meetings with us and those discussions, or if it's more convenient, we can continue through a Zoom platform.
So instruction for quarantine students is something that we had to wrestle with last year, and we learned some things last year about delivering instruction to kids at home and at school simultaneously. And in my conversations with the Highlands staff, as I was going through my transition into the district, this is the thing that they identified as probably the most challenging thing for them last year is trying to simultaneously deliver instruction to a kid on their computer as well as a classroom full of students, because when you're rooming and zooming, as it became known, you have to be paying attention to your computer, and you're really tied to that device. And there's no way, if I was running this, if I was participating in this meeting with my eyes on my computer the entire time, you would feel a loss of like the engagement and the fact that, is he talking to me or someone on the screen? And that was a reality for our students in the classroom. And so we want to be mindful of that. We do need to balance that, though, however, with the fact that our current reality is that students may be home for extended periods of time. And if they're home for 2 weeks of instruction, we mentioned in one of the opening slides, we believe that every day of instruction is important. And so to just say, well, hey, we'll see you in 2 weeks, that's not a great option either. And so trying to weigh, again, the cost benefit of teaching quarantine students, and how do we do that effectively without there being a significant cost. And so really the three criteria that we're shooting for here is that the remote instruction is high quality. Whether students are at home or in school, we want it to be high quality. That it doesn't have an unreasonably negative impact on the in-person learning. We know it'll have some impact. It's impossible for it not to, but the degree to which it negatively impacts it is something that we want to be mindful of. And then also that it's not unreasonably laborious for the teacher. Being tethered to their computer and having their face in their computer when they have 18 students in front of them, it was something that just about everyone did last year, because it's what you do in a crisis, right? You figure out, how do we make this work? And from everything that I've heard, our teachers did a fantastic job of it. But if there's one thing that they're putting on the list of, man, that was hard, can we not make that our new normal? That would be it. And so our current thinking on this, and this is based on our projections of how many students are going to be in quarantine and what that looks like. And so this too might be something that needs to evolve based on, we're still in uncharted territory, really. We've been through a year of it, but what the next year looks like is still to be determined. Our goal is to, for those quarantine absences that are anticipated to be 5 days or more, that we would provide remote live stream instruction in reading and math for K-4, and in math and language arts for 5-8. And then in the areas of early childhood, science, social studies, and world language, we would provide that work asynchronously. And so there is a kind of technology that allows us to provide that remote live stream instruction that doesn't tether the teacher to their computer. They're able to walk amongst the classroom. They're able to engage in conversation with the students. They're able to really, once they get it started, go about teaching their lesson. And the students at home are essentially able to eavesdrop on the instruction and participate by asking questions and hearing student responses when they need to. So is it still an ask of our staff? Absolutely. They will be doing this not without cost, but because they're that committed to our students and because our staff is that good. But it will be significantly different than last year, where on a moment's notice they may have to flip open their lid and their entire day looks different. We're trying to provide a tool that makes it much easier and much higher quality, and we're trying to be intentional about the timing of it. It's not going to be, I'm going to be absent tomorrow, how about if you fire up that live streaming machine? It's if you're going to be out for a week or more, we want to put a finger in that dam of you losing that instruction. And we also want to be intentional about providing it in the areas that are really hard to catch kids up and that impacts every other area. I want to be really explicit about this is not a statement of some content areas being more important than others. It's really not. It's about we may not be able to do everything and do it well. And if we're put to a decision of what should we provide remote instruction for a 2-week absence, catching students up in reading and math because of the way that it builds on itself and because it's so foundational for those other content areas, those are the things that end up getting the nod for we can't do everything, so what do we want to focus on in an effort to make it reasonable.
What is the technology that you guys are looking at using for that?
Yeah, it's called the Neat Bar. It's essentially a high quality camera and microphone system that's mounted on the top of a big screen TV, and that device in the classroom through a wide angle lens and good microphones captures the classroom and the conversations in the classroom. And so,
are you getting those for all the classrooms, or you're just going to have like a couple units that you move around as needed?
yeah, so we'll have a stable of them that just get employed as needed. I'll be honest with you, I hope we waste a whole bunch of money on this. Because if we waste a whole bunch of money on this, it means we were prepared for the worst case scenario and we barely had to use it. It sounds funny for me to say I hope we waste the district's money, but I want to be prepared for this scenario. I want to be prepared to provide this high quality instruction, but I hope we don't have to use it very much. And so it's something that if it was set up where the podium is and we were having a conversation not on microphones, the students at home who logged into that Zoom meeting would be able to see both of us and be able to hear both of us having a conversation. One of the nuances of having to room in Zoom is the teachers having to repeat, oh, Billy asked a great question, and having to repeat that to the kids at home, or forgetting to do that because they're just in the flow of teaching, and then the kid hears a response to a question that they didn't know what was asked. It brings the quality of that remote instruction down. So this device will allow us to do that. It also allows the students to engage with each other. The student at home could raise their hand digitally or say, hey, I've got a question, and their voice comes through the TV, and they're able to ask a question of the teacher who's leading the discussion in the classroom. And so it's a great option when we have to use it. We just hope that we don't have to use it very much. And it will be something that, we'll obviously need to provide our teachers with professional development on it. It's really intuitive, it's easy, but it is something new. And it is something that there will be a little bit of a learning curve, which is why we'll get to the recommendations of some of the specifics, which will make sense why we're talking about if it's a 5-day or more absence on day 3, because we want to be fair to our teachers and acknowledge the fact that that it's going to take a little bit to prepare, especially because the teachers through the Zoom meeting can present their screen to the kids at home. So if the teacher was using their Apple TV to present a PowerPoint presentation or share some visuals, the students at home can see that on their screen at home through the screen sharing capability of Zoom meetings.
So it's important to note that remote learning is no longer a choice like we knew it from this previous year. It will look different because it is only applicable to our quarantine students. And so those students who are absent, as John said, for 5 or more days would be able to kind of participate in this. Our remote instruction will not be for travel or doctor's appointments or shorter illnesses, and it will begin on the 3rd day of the absence to allow our staff to to move in that technology, to retrain. We all know we get training at the beginning of the year, and then, we go to use it and we might not be remembering. So again, just kind of an on-demand training as we move them into the classrooms. So within that time when the student is not zooming in, not zooming, but we will provide the instruction and the materials on Schoology or Seesaw, depending, what platform is being used in the grade level.
So as in previous years, school code requires us to also plan and provide instructions for our students due to a significant medical condition, whether short-term or long-term, homebound or hospital instruction. So typically what that would look like is 5 hours a week of instruction, and in the past it's been more where a teacher or a tutor would go to the student's home and deliver that instruction. So this is something we'll continue to consider for kids. The process is pretty fluid. The process really starts with, the family contacting probably myself or an administrator and talking through it. It does require a doctor's certification, so the doctor has to actually certify that there is a medical condition that would cause the students to miss 10 plus days in that year. And it can be intermittently, but it's something that an illness of the nature that is going to cause prolonged absence and that the student wouldn't be able to participate in in-person learning. And, with consideration to, again, the focus is traditionally the ELA and the math that the homebound instruction really works towards. And so it's really kind of an individual conversation with families. Do we want to do the more traditional model, or is the remote model that we're using for quarantine something that would be helpful for these kids too?
All right, thank you, Ellie and Amy. Obviously, I inherited a fantastic district office team, and so I'll probably say that. You'll probably get tired of hearing me say that, but Allie and Amy and Kent and Eric and Laura and Mike have been absolutely fantastic to work with in these first few weeks of being here, and we got real fortunate bringing Katie on, and she's doing a fantastic job. So as they're leaving the table, everything you're seeing is a product of a really good team versus any one individual's effort. So I'll transition. Well, before I transition into my superintendent's report, any closing thoughts or questions or comments on the learning plan and the process that we're going through for mitigation?
I would just ask that we're keeping in mind any kids that are immunocompromised and how that plays into our decision-making about mitigation strategies. And, I just want to make sure we're keeping accessibility and equity top of mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Katie, that's a really good point too, because again, whichever the decision is made, it is something to consider that our masking decision does affect certain families to the fact that they're even able to come to school, or if they're going to have to be more participating in homebound or hospital instruction. So definitely something to think about.
All right, three brief items that I'll touch on here quickly. And actually, Allie already covered the first one for me in the summer school update. So we'll jump right to the TTO update. And I know, Mr. Taylor, you've been involved in this conversation as well, and so you may have some information on this that you want to share. But the quick version is that there was a court ruling that allowed Lyons Township High School to opt out of the TTO, and that they've chosen to do that. And then the other main point to know is that the TTO has decided not to appeal that decision. So that was something that I know was discussed at the last meeting because of the financial implication it would have on the feeder districts, because any cost that was accrued in that challenge would essentially be passed on, and so the TTO has decided not to do that.
Yeah, so I had a couple things I wanted to mention. So I mentioned this last time, I think. So Brian Anderson, he's a board member for 102. He was the president. I don't think he's president anymore, but he, for a while now, he's kind of been organizing a group of, board presidents from the feeder districts. And there's been meetings on and off, over the years. And I think even Bob Hyatt was on this, right? Before my time even, right? So, but anyway, they've had meetings. I mentioned we had a meeting with State Senator Landek months ago now, and kind of talking about what we can do going forward legislatively to kind of make everybody happy with the TTO. And that was long before the lawsuit was settled. In the past month or so, they had another meeting with Senator Landek, and there appears to be progress on this idea of giving school boards the opportunity to appoint some of the board members on the TTO board. So right now, the TTO board has 3 elected members, and there's talk of having the feeder or the member districts being able to appoint their own representatives too. And that's an interesting move. That's kind of a big deal because right now we really don't have any legal say into what the TTO does, but being able to appoint board members would change that. There are a couple other things they were talking about, which again, I'm not sure how likely it is, but the fact that they're talking about it is a good sign. But even to the point of allowing districts to decide whether to withdraw or stay in the TTO, let the districts decide. And then another thing, a potential of combining TTOs. So with LT pulling out of ours, that's LT I think was 20-25% of the funds at the TTO. So that's a significant difference, right? So the possibility of combining like us with Proviso to combine them together, so again there's a larger pool of assets to be invested. So there is some stuff legislatively which I think ultimately is really going to be the way that there's going to be any change with the TTO through the legislature, and there seems to be some movement now, so that's a good sign. But that's about it. Just there's stuff going on, and hopefully towards the end of the year we'll get more idea what's going on. And then the other thing, Jennifer Dunleavy graciously volunteered to attend TTO meetings when possible. Every once in a while they schedule a meeting at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, which, okay. But, it's an evening meeting. Hopefully Jennifer's around. We can attend that. So just go a little bit more look into that. I've been to one, and, they're not very exciting. So.
Andy, when you say that there's talk of having a member from, or a board member from the member districts being representatives to the TTO, does that mean, and maybe this hasn't been talked about, but is that like the same status and voting right as an elected member?
The idea
of the
would be a
TTO,
board
or?
member. So say there's currently 3, say they add 4 school board appointed board members, then there would be 7 members on the board. So they would be voting members of the board, is the way I understand it now. By the time it actually gets to the legislative process, it could be something completely different. But yeah, that's the way I understand it. They'd be voting members. There is, I think it's Bremen, and I might be mixing it up with Bloom, but I think it's Bremen. They actually are governed by the school districts, and there's a special, there's a separate public act just for that TTO office where the member districts each appoint a member, and it's the member districts that are the board. And I don't think there's any citizen voted members on that board. It's all appointed by the member districts. And so that's kind of what Brian was kind of proposing, like, hey, look at Bremen, they're doing this, why can't we do it, And I think ultimately it's going to be a compromise thing where it's going to be a school board and at-large elected positions, but it could be something. So, and maybe, I don't know, let us know what you hear in the meetings too. So. But thank you for that. So.
Yeah, and the last item is just a public service announcement that Lyons Township High School is hosting a vaccine clinic for COVID and meningitis, and the information, the specifics on that will be included in the board summary that goes out to the the community. So the sidewalk project update, and Kent's going to join me for any questions that I may not have the history on or the information. We've had the opportunity to kind of pause and reflect on the process and on the goals of the sidewalk project. And so I just want to first acknowledge there are really, really good intentions and goals throughout this process from the inception. The idea of the safety grant, the ability to use it to create sidewalks, to provide safer conditions for kids to walk to school, all worthy objectives. I think everyone would acknowledge that through the process, there may have been some communications or some opportunities to involve stakeholders in the conversation that might have been missed. And so we just want to pause and take this opportunity before making any final decisions to reflect on that and to see might there be strategies or options that were not considered, and might there be conversations that need to be had before moving forward with what was the original recommendation. And so just as a summary, the project goal was to make safer walking paths for students as they get to school. And there were really two targeted areas that are shown there on the map. The one in blue is the Laurel Avenue stem, and that would actually extend a little bit to the east as well to get across 58th Street. And then the stem shown in red along 59th Street that would go from Wolf Road to the Highlands campus. And so our recommendation is to proceed with the plans for the section along 59th Street from Wolf Road to Highlands. There's a lot of reasons for that, but you can see those bars in yellow there are all sidewalks leading to the intersection of 59th and Wolf. And so we have students that are walking along those sidewalks, and then they get to 59th Street, and they don't have a non-street car-bearing way to walk to the school. And so that stem of sidewalk highlighted in red there really does solve a problem. It gets kids from current sidewalks to school without having to walk on the street and share space with cars. And for that reason, we think we should move forward with that. And doing so is just about what we're getting in the safety grant. It may be a little bit more based on, I know there's still some numbers to come in, final numbers on the work, but it's going to be close to a little bit over, but close to what the grant funded. Our other recommendation is to address the immediate need for safety along Laurel Avenue through some intermediate steps. So just as a quick recap, the safety issue on Laurel Avenue is that the traffic is choosing to make that 2 southbound lanes so that they don't have to wait in line. At that time of day when students are being dropped off on Laurel Avenue, it becomes a one-way street. But cars waiting in line to drop off, if they want to go park in the school or they're in a hurry, they create a second lane of southbound traffic, which then crowds the street and interferes with the students' kind of designated walking area southbound, and it creates an unsafe situation. In looking at it, we think we can address the need for improved safety through a few things. One would be signage and traffic barriers. And so we will be placing traffic barriers along what will be the eastern side of Laurel Avenue in the southbound lane that will not permit cars to create a second lane. So the signage will be clear. Hey, this is a one-lane street at this moment in time, and for student safety, don't make it a two-laner. And those barricades will create kind of an awkward situation for cars that try to get around our system. they're either going to have to go through the barriers, or they're going to get up to the barrier and then have to get some permission from people in the drop-off lane to let them back in until they get to the next barrier, and then they're going to have to get that permission again. So we really think it's just going to be a matter of convenience, and you don't want to make that eye contact. You know, when you're that car and you're trying to get over and you try not to look at the person next to you, we're banking on that as being one of our strategies. Not that any of us...
Way more awkward when you know the people you're trying to cut out.
Exactly. Not that any of us have ever been that person in the merge lane who stretched it a little too far, but we're gonna employ that social pressure.
Will the barriers leave enough room for cars to move over in case there are walkers along Laurel?
So the barriers will, what we're envisioning now, they'll be kind of in the middle of what would be the second lane of traffic.
Okay.
And so students will have a dedicated area. If they're walking south on Laurel, they'll have a dedicated area to the left of the barriers that they'll be able to walk. And then cars will have a full lane to the right where they wait their turn to make the drop off. This will obviously be combined with good communication to the parents, making sure our expectations are clear, making sure everyone understands the new procedure before they turn onto Laurel Avenue. And then also a community partnership. There are opportunities for us to partner with local law enforcement, to be a presence during certain times of day, just to make sure that that we're doing everything we can to make that a safe passage for kids. And so by employing those strategies, it allows us to pause on the current plan to build a sidewalk along Laurel Avenue. And there's several reasons for that. One would be the process that kind of got us to the sidewalk, and maybe some missteps or some steps that we might want to take if we're going to do something that extreme in a community that doesn't currently have sidewalks. But the other thing would be, that whole area in green, Laurel Avenue isn't the only place where, there may be a potential, what's happening on Laurel Avenue may not be unique to that area. And so building the Laurel Avenue sidewalk doesn't solve the whole problem like the sidewalk does along 59th Street. And so if our efforts along Laurel Avenue prove to be insufficient, then we would go down this path again, but we would take some other steps. We would look into the possibility of employing a transportation engineer to do a traffic study and say, here's our issue, given your expertise. When you look at this, what are our options? What are some things that we can do? And maybe there's a unique or creative idea that's out there that we haven't already considered. It may not even be possible, or it may not even be necessary, I should say. These efforts may solve the issue. And then we don't need to, there's a couple $100,000 that we can invest in other safety measures or in instruction. I should also mention, I don't think it's up here, but our recommendation is to move forward with the 6 flashing safety signs that are solar powered. Those are part of the 59th Street job, because they're at important points along our kids' walking paths. And so, what did I miss, or what do you want to add?
Just 2 things. The bid has already been awarded for the Crossing Light project, so we actually last week just did a final signature to get our permit from the county, which has been extremely long and arduous to get to that point. Pardon me?
We have a permit?
No, we've signed the application. So all
2
our,
more weeks.
we don't know. So that's where we are on the Crossing Light. The other thing just to mention is, we've talked to Sean McDermott from the Highway Highway Department about utilizing that street differently than it is now, and he's agreeable to some options we're presenting.
All right.
I have some questions.
Sure.
I just want to be clear.
Would you mind, just so that everyone can hear,
Yeah.
because I'm sure there's audience members, and so we get on the recording?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Is the switch on?
I think so.
Is it? Okay.
Yep.
Are we gonna be putting the barriers up, I just wanna be clear,
Mhm.
at pickup time as well, right? Not just drop off?
Correct.
Okay, and then I have another question that correlates to pickup time. A lot of times people come early and they pull through and then they park on Laurel. You know, that makes it really hard a lot of times when you're pulling out of the parking lot and there's people parked on either side of the street when it's not meant for that.
Mhm.
Are we gonna do anything to address that as well?
So you're saying they park on Laurel Avenue south of 58th?
Yes.
The little stem of Laurel that's in
Yes,
front of the
facing
schools?
north. They pull through and they, on either side.
Yeah, that's the first time this is being put on my radar. So, you know, we can definitely look at that. I can observe it. You know, we can look into that. Anything that's a safety issue, we want to address it. You know, really, this is the solution to things like this are everyone doing their little part. If you have to, you know, if everyone's part is waiting 2 extra minutes for the collective safety of our students, or waiting in line instead of parking on a street that's currently needed as a pass-through for cars, then, you know, we'll be appealing to the good of, you know, people's collective, let's do this together versus this is what's good for me in this moment. And that's where the partnership with local law enforcement may come in handy. So, you know, we'll have good conversations with people, we'll communicate the expectations. And if that's something that needs to be part of our communication to the public about the new plan with the barriers, and we need to include language about where it's really, you know, it's obstructive to park here because of our traffic flows, that'll be good to include in that memo. That's something that I can collaborate with Mrs. Magruder on as well.
I just wondered, what are the barriers? Like, are
So-
they cones or?
They'll be the kinds you see when police don't want you to drive down a particular street. It's just an orange, you know, not as big as the barrels. It's got the, you know, it'll fold up, the fork will go down, and it's probably 8 inches wide and 4 feet tall. And you can put custom signage on it, and so we'll have signage that's custom to it. And if those prove to be insufficient, we'll get bigger ones. We're balancing we're balancing the need for our custodial staff to put it out twice a day with the need for it to be seen and a deterrent. And so we'll
Well,
yeah.
I'm asking in part, I was curious, but if it's easy enough and if it goes well, there might be other streets, you know, and I'm thinking of one in particular on the other side of the school where I see similar activity.
Yeah.
And I think, to your point about teaching the kids empathy and kindness, that's probably a good message to send to the parents, because our kids are watching, and we're all stressed out in the morning. It's not easy getting kids to school, but I think, you know, pausing and maybe delivering a message, you know, when we explain the why.
Sure.
About just being kind to each other and
Yeah.
chilling out.
Yeah, we can keep our eyes open for other opportunities. At some point, it becomes a manpower and resources issue, because, you know, our people were already doing other things in the morning and the afternoon, and we're going to have to steal them away from those other important duties in order to do this. And we're going to do that because we're prioritizing student safety. The scope to which we're able to do that, and, you know, all through the community, you know, we'll have to gauge that, and maybe there is another targeted area, but let's see how effective this is, and we'll go from there. Anything else, Kat? Okay.
What kind of timeline would this be then for the sidewalk, for the 59 sidewalk?
The construction grant is still under review by the state, so they're in an environmental impact study phase right now. So we're really at the mercy of how that process plays out.
It could still be months?
It could be.
Yeah, it just totally.
Yes.
I think some of you couldn't hear what I said. I just asked what the timeline would be for the 59th Street sidewalk. Okay, so it's still just a lot of paperwork and red tape to get through to.
If history is an indication, this might be months and potentially next summer, just
Yeah.
who knows?
Right.
Everything is really moving very slowly with the state right now.
Okay. Is it quick? Is it a quick question?
I would like to ask some questions. I live 2 doors here on Harvey.
So,
I
yeah, can I?
I shouldn't have opened this up.
No, it's okay. So I'm happy to answer those questions for you. We have distinct times in the meeting where we open it up for public comment, and our entire meeting is not like a give and take with the community, and so we won't be taking questions at this point from the community. But I'd be happy to meet with you right after the meeting, and if we need to sit down in the coming days, I'd be happy to do that and get all your questions answered. And if I need to pass any information, if you're not able to stay for the whole time, I'll happily give you a call in the morning. If you want to leave your name and number with Laura here,
That'd be fine.
yeah, I'll give you a ring in the morning. Alrighty? We covered the TTO update, and we're to the action items.
Action items, board agreements and expectations.
Yeah, so on July 7th, the school board and myself and a facilitator from the Illinois Association of School Boards engaged in a starting right workshop. This is not because we had some problem that we were trying to resolve. This is just best practices, and it's something that the IASB recommends for every school board to go through, and I think it really reflects nicely on our school board that you were wanting to take a night and invest that time in engaging in conversations about how do we work well together. And so the goal of that work is to develop operating principles that ensure transparency, collaboration, efficiency, and effectiveness in what we do. We are a public body, and there are certain things, certain codes that drive our work, and we want to make sure we're well informed of those and abiding by them. And so it was great conversation, at least from my lens. I thought it was really worthwhile. And the agreements and expectations are linked in the agenda, and we're looking to approve those and make them a part of what we do. And I would welcome any other comments or reflections on that process or on these agreements if anyone has them from the board.
I just say, I thought the meeting went well. I liked what we got through, and I think it's a good set of agreements, and yeah, it was a very productive meeting, so thanks. Will this be posted somewhere? Like, is it like on our board page or something, or?
Yeah, it was posted in the agenda. We'll also post it on the website. There's a board
The
drop-down
board,
menu,
yeah.
and we
Will
can
be in
make
there.
it one of those documents that's associated with that section of the website.
Okay, we have a motion for that.
Sure. I move to approve the District 106 board agreements and expectations as presented.
I'll second.
All right, so it's Jennifer Gusatine, Jennifer Dunleavy. Voice vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Motion passes.
All right, our next item is our food service provider contract, and I turn it over to Katie.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. I'll be quicker, I hope. So we went out to bid just this past spring to look at our food service contract, and we got 2 proposals that came back to us, one from our current vendor Quest and one from Just a Dash Catering. They were very different proposals, and so we really had to do an in-depth dive, which is why this was not a part of the June approval. They're very different programs, and so we really needed to look at the pros and cons of not just the cost, but how we would be able to function under the 2 different environments. So for the Quest proposal that they brought in, functionally it would look the same, no changes for food offerings, for parents, for ordering, all of that would be the same. The difference there is that under our previous contract, there was no management fee, and they took on all risk of loss. So if an amount of meals that were ordered did not meet a threshold at which they were making any profits, they were just taking those losses. So they estimated that they would need to apply a minimum $40,000 management fee, and that there would be an additional up to $30,000 annually in losses. And they wanted us to then pay that $40,000 and take on that loss. So they were estimating an annual cost of $69,232. On the other side of the coin here was Just a Dash. Now, their service would look entirely different. It would no longer be cooked out of Riverside Brookfield High School. They would bring their service into our kitchens here, which certainly are very small, but can absolutely function under the size of service we're providing. And so we took a really close look at that. They would come into our own kitchens. We would have to purchase ovens to accommodate that, but we do have warmers already in those kitchens now. But we would also then have to bring in some staff members. So right now, they have 2 part-time staff members in our buildings that just manage serving. We would need to keep that in our buildings, but also bring in 2 people that would do the cooking. So Just a Dash would hire the 2 people to cook. They initially wanted us to hire the 2 part-time staff members to do the serving. We proposed in response that they hire them and bill it back to us, which you'll see in the contract as an addendum. And that would be our cost. So initial costs for bringing in the proper equipment, a bill back on those 2 part-time staff members, but there is no management fee, there is no risk of loss. They are assuming those risks. And so when you look at it financially, even if it were only the $40,000 management fee and the risk of loss is overestimated here, it would still be cheaper for us to look at Just a Dash catering. So we felt very strongly that we have the capacity to bring the ordering in-house, that we have the space to make sure we bring in those ovens and get it done in-house. I've worked very closely with Eric and with Kent. Thank you guys so much for your help on this. Eric has done a ton of work on making sure that we are able to do the ordering within and do the financing through, families, paying for meals, doing that all within our own parent portal. So rather than having a separate login to go to Quest and make those orders, we could do it within our own parent portal. Kent has done a lot of work on making sure we've got the right kitchen equipment specs and all of that, and so we're very confident that we can make that happen. And so the recommendation tonight is that we switch our service to Just a Dash catering. The cost for family meals would stay the same, and then we would manage in-house ordering. Just a Dash would have access to knowing how many students have ordered meals per day, things like that. And then they would bill us back those 2 part-time employees.
And I know it's in your report, but do you want to also mention what we heard in the way of references or people that are already using it?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so we did a deep dive on references because I was previously unfamiliar with the company, as was Mike Duback, my predecessor. And so he did a deep dive on those references and got glowing reviews. There is also a neighboring district, Pleasantdale 107, that is currently using them and has been for the last several years. And I spoke with the secretary. We talked with their business office. There was a lot of really, really positive feedback on food quality, on service quality, on just working with the company. In several meetings that I've had with them so far, the ownership and the management that I've talked with have been really fantastic. I think that we're going to have a great partnership. Thank you for bringing that up.
Any questions?
Is this the same kind of process where parents will pre-order the
Yes.
meals like a month in advance?
Yeah, it'll be a week or 2 so that the company has time to order their supplies, and then they'll be cooking exactly the amount ordered that day. They'll have a little overage in case somebody shows up and didn't order and doesn't have food. We'll be able to feed them, certainly, and then charge them accordingly. But, yeah, we'll order ahead of time. So you'll see, like, in the parent portal, it'll open up a week at a time and then close a week before that, if that makes sense. And we'll make sure we include lots of communication to families to know what to expect and where to go.
Any other questions? All right, motion?
I move to approve the food service contract with Just a Dash Catering LLC
for the 2021-2022 school year at a cost to the district of $4 per meal, and the addendum for Just a Dash to bill the district for 2 part-time employees at a rate of $14 to $15 an hour.
Second.
That was Katie? Okay. Christy and Katie, roll call, please.
Mrs. Bruno?
Aye.
Mrs. Fatella?
Aye.
Mrs. Golm?
Aye.
Mrs. Mitchell?
Aye.
Mrs. Gusentine?
Aye.
Mrs. Dunleavy?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor?
Aye. Motion carries. Next up, consent agenda. Anybody have any questions? I know I did have one about the finances.
Yep,
that
the expenses.
Yeah, the expenses.
That's why I stayed, in case we
Yeah.
wanted to talk about that. Absolutely. So Andy had brought up, we were looking at some of the budgeted versus actuals on expense and revenue. In terms of the revenues, we did come in a little under. That is a timing issue. We've got some money still coming in. We just recently got our final approval on the ESSER 2 grant, and so we still have to submit for those reimbursements. That'll be coming, I would hope, we'll see them in August. It kind of depends on, as all things, the state and timing, but we'll see those coming in, and so that's just a delay. On the expense side, it's a little different. There are some things that'll be coming in a little bit later, but there are some things where we just came in under, so I'm going to outline some of those differences. When you look at the O&M budget, the operations and maintenance budget, some of the things are timing with summer projects or with the crossing lights that Kent and John were just talking about earlier. That project has not yet started, but was budgeted in the last fiscal year. And so we'll see those price tags come in later, and they will be budgeted accordingly in fiscal year 22. So there's part of that we'll be seeing later. But there were also things like the gas and electric bills. Between those two things, it was like $55,000 under. So some of it just came in under budget. Similarly, there was a $25,000 contingency line. We didn't end up needing it. And so on the O&M side, it's kind of split between what we're going to still see in fiscal year 22 and what we won't. In the ed fund, that was a little over $500,000 that came in under budget. And that, for the most part, is really just things that were coming in under budget. Some of the COVID testing came in under, some of the PTC reimbursements came in under. One of the large chunks of that, though, was staffing in terms of stipends and substitutes and all of those types of things. Those accounts, we definitely made adjustments in the amended budget, but there was still about $225,000 in staffing, which makes up, obviously, a large chunk of what you're talking about there. Textbooks accounts, there were just a lot of things that kind of added up to a large amount there. So we're not going to see a lot of that come back in
Okay,
fiscal
so
year
it
22.
actually,
We did actually save some money.
There is a chunk of it that it actually is even better than what the amended budget
Yep.
was. Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
Is there anything else about that you guys have any questions about? Okay.
All right. Thanks, Katie.
Sure, thank you.
All right, motion for the consent agenda?
I move to approve the action items contained in consent agenda 7C1-7C4.
Second.
I'm sorry, it's Jenny. So that's Jody and Jenny. That's a roll call.
Mrs. Golm?
Aye.
Mrs. Mitchell?
Aye.
Mrs. Gusentine?
Aye.
Mrs. Bruno?
Aye.
Mrs. Dunleavy?
Aye.
Mrs. Fatella?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor?
Aye. That carries. And next up, adjourn to close, oh no, committee report, sorry. All right, so Finance Committee, I don't know if you guys met, have anything to say?
We
Okay.
have not met since the last meeting.
Foundation, anything?
They haven't met since
Okay.
summer.
And then Parent Advisory Committee, anything you wanted to bring up?
Go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick note, Jody Gome, Board Member Jody Gome, and Amy and I have been collaborating on a plan for a parent advisory committee, really born out of a desire to have a way to involve parents in providing feedback and in conversations in a more meaningful way than just the random survey, actually being able to come to the table, hear information, engage in a discussion. And so we've been working on what the criteria for membership would be. We've been working on having conversations about what the scope of that committee would look like. And by the August meeting, we'll have some final information on what that looks like, and then do a communication push to see who's interested in participating. And yeah, we're excited about having a mechanism to bring that parent voice. And it's not going to be, we're always going to ask this in September. You know, we want it to be an agile enough group that, based on what's going on in the district at that moment in time, we already have a group of parents who can come together and give us feedback. And so really the role of this will evolve based on what's happening in that year. There may be things that every year we get feedback on topic X. And then there may be other things that this year there was something going on with, you know, student safety and walking to school, and we brought people together and talked about that. And then that's resolved, and we don't need to talk about that every year, but next year it's something different. So yeah, we're excited about, I believe this is something that was in place in the past. Is that correct?
I don't know, not since I've been.
Or maybe not for a while. So it'll be a nice
It's very
addition.
retro, John.
Yes. We're bringing back the old school.
All right, I
So,
like it.
yeah, so we're excited about being able to bring parents into the conversation in that way. And yeah, and Jody and Amy and I will finish that work before the August meeting.
All right, thank you. All right, with that, we'll adjourn to closed session. I need a motion for that.
All right. I move to adjourn to closed session at 12 p.m. for the purpose of discussing appointment, employment, compensation, performance, or dismissal of specific employees, 5 ILCS 120-2C1, as well as litigation when an action against, affecting, or on behalf of the particular body, public body has been filed and is pending for a court or administrative tribunal, or when the public body finds that an action is probable or imminent, in which case the basis for the finding shall be reported and entered into the minutes of the closed meeting, 5 ILCS 122C11.
Thank you. Good work.
Second.
Second, so it's Katie and Jody. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Fatella?
Aye.
Mrs. Goln?
Aye.
Mrs. Gusentine?
Aye.
Mrs. Bruno?
Aye.
Mrs. Mitchell?
Aye.
Mrs. Dunleavy?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor?
Aye. We are now in closed session.